Hello, welcome to Book Journey. Today, I would like to share with you a literary classic, the novel of Human Bondage by British author William Somerset Maugham, published in 1915. For some reason, Maugham is the first foreign author many of my friends who love literature have come to admire. I am no exception. I guess there are two main reasons for this. First, Maugham's works are very readable. His writing is simple, his sentences are close to colloquial speech, and his stories are told in a lively and engaging manner. Once you pick up one of his books, you may find yourself reading hundreds of pages without even realizing it, without any sense of burden. The second reason seems even more important. Maugham has a keen and sharp eye for people. His writing is often satirical. When he creates characters, he always adds a few strokes to seemingly ordinary roles, revealing a small glimpse of the vanity, shyness, cunning, and embarrassment that people usually hide. This makes his characters come to life and makes the stories feel more real. When reading Maugham's books, intelligent readers often suddenly see themselves or someone they know in one of the characters, as if the pages reflect our gaze and shine directly into the corners of our hearts. This feeling is both thrilling and unsettling. Readers familiar with Maugham may know an anecdote about him. Maugham is often referred to as a second-rate writer, which is actually his own self-assessment. It is said that once, a writer asked Maugham to write a preface for his new book, and Maugham set a condition to play a game of bridge with him. Naturally, Maugham won the game, and he said triumphantly, "I am about the same level in both playing cards and writing, being among the best of the second-raters." Since then, the title second-rate writer has gradually become a secret code among Maugham's fans. Maugham's self-description as a second-rate writer is not entirely modest. In his view, first-rate writers are the likes of Balzac, Tolstoy, and Dostoevsky, whose vision can see through walls. He believes he can only understand what is right in front of him. However, compared to many authors who cannot see anything clearly, this is already quite remarkable. I really enjoy reading Maugham's books, and have read all of his works that have been translated into Chinese, so I would like to defend him here. Of course, I also admire Dostoevsky, whose analysis of human nature goes deep into the marrow. Books like Crime and Punishment, with thousands of words of characters' inner struggles in monologues, can make readers feel as if their own hearts are being shattered. Yet, in Maugham's sharpness, there is still the propriety of an English gentleman. He only lifts a corner of the human heart to show you, gives a sly smile, and then continues the story, as if knowing that saying one more word would make the reader feel embarrassed. This sense of just the right measure shows wisdom without being cruel. It invites readers to be accomplices in peering into human nature without falling into the abyss of the soul. This is Maugham's skill. Therefore, if you read books not to deeply penetrate some profound truths, but to gain a bit of elegant pleasure, Maugham's works may be the most suitable reading material. As a master of understanding human nature, Maugham is very clear about his own positioning. This clarity, combined with a pragmatic attitude, has made him one of the best-selling authors of the 20th century. Of Human Bondage is Maugham's longest work, with nearly 600,000 words in the Chinese translation. The title is derived from the philosopher Spinoza's Ethics. According to the original definition, it refers to a person who, despite having the knowledge to distinguish right from wrong, is still limited by their nature, ultimately making a wrong understanding of the world, and making numerous mistakes in action. To put it in a somewhat cliched way, it is knowing many truths but still not living a good life. The protagonist, who always fails to live a good life, is named Philip. In many ways, Philip is very much like a literary alter ego of Maugham. Some even say that Of Human Bondage is Maugham's autobiography under a different name. Maugham's explanation is that while it is not exactly an autobiography, Philip is indeed a character designed based on himself. This is one of the highlights of the book Of Human Bondage. You can understand the way the author perceives the world from the protagonist's words and deeds. This is very interesting and also very helpful for understanding Maugham's other works. Another reason I particularly recommend you listen to Of Human Bondage is that, compared to Maugham's other representative works, this book has a very unique theme. What makes it unique? Let's read and savor it as we go along. After understanding the entire work, we will compare it with Maugham's other famous novels, and the unique features of this book will stand out. Alright, let's begin. First, let's get to know the protagonist of the story, Philip. As we mentioned earlier, Philip is a character created by Maugham based on himself. So, what are the similarities between these two individuals, both in the book and in real life? Perhaps the most obvious similarity is that both of them have some physical issues from birth. Maugham's issues were not severe. He was short, had an average appearance, and had a slight stutter. These characteristics caused him a lot of distress in his early life, and even after he became a world-famous writer, attending various high society social events, his unremarkable looks and stutter often made him feel sensitive and embarrassed. Perhaps in order to create a character that he could accurately identify with, Maugham gave Philip a congenital deformed foot in the book, causing him to walk with a limp. This physical defect is more noticeable than Maugham's own and has become a source of distress for Philip throughout his life, significantly influencing his personality. We will see this repeatedly in the story that follows. Another similarity between Maugham and Philip is their early life experiences. Maugham roughly based Philip's life journey from the age of 9 to nearly 30 on his own resume. This is also the main content of the entire book. Maugham was born in 1874. His father was a lawyer, and the family's financial situation was upper middle class. Unfortunately, both of Maugham's parents passed away before he turned 10. After that, Maugham was sent to live with an uncle who was a clergyman. His teenage years were spent in a monotonous and bleak environment. After graduating from high school, Maugham studied medicine in London and obtained his medical license after 5 years. During these years of practicing medicine, he became accustomed to seeing pain, death, and separation. Instead of becoming numb, he became more perceptive and examined human suffering with a more detached eye. This experience accumulated material for his future literary creation and laid the foundation for his spiritual outlook. Now let's look at Philip's experiences, and you will find that his life trajectory is roughly parallel to Maugham's. Philip was born in 1876, almost the same age as Maugham. He was an only child, with a father who was a doctor and a mother of respectable background. However, like Maugham, his parents passed away one after another when he was 9 years old. Philip was then sent to live with his uncle, who was a clergyman in the countryside, and his teenage years were as oppressive as Maugham's. Maugham even based Philip's teenage life scene entirely on the high school he himself attended. However, after graduating from high school, Philip's story diverges from Maugham's. Instead of following his uncle's arrangement to study theology and take over his uncle's position, he decided to explore his own path in life. He went to Germany to receive a more advanced comprehensive education than what was available in Britain at the time, and then tried studying accounting for a year. After that, he followed his inner impulse and went to Paris to study fine arts. All these years of exploration came to naught. He eventually chose to study medicine, spending 7 years in total, and finally became a doctor. At this point, Philip's experience converges again with that of the real Maugham. If you only heard the brief introduction just now, you might think that the story in Of Human Bondage is not very exciting. Isn't it just the story of a confused young man exploring his life path? It sounds like a thin resume. But the power of literature lies precisely in the details, in the gaps where ordinary life shines with light, something that cannot be restored by a mere plot summary. If you patiently read the thick novel woven with Maugham's meticulous writing, you will find that there are surprises everywhere in this seemingly ordinary story, and you will gradually understand the meaning of the bonds of human nature. Next, let's start with the protagonist Philip at the age of 9. At 9 years old, Philip was a naive child, so naive that he did not fully understand death. When his parents passed away one after another in that year, he only vaguely felt that he would never see them again and was often saddened by it. But his mind was still very simple. After crying himself out, he would sleep, and upon waking up, he would play with his toys, forgetting his sorrow when he was fully engaged in play. Compared to him, his uncle and aunt were more troubled at this time. This couple in their 40s had no children of their own and lived in a seaside town, 60 miles outside London. Philip's uncle was a clergyman of the Church of England and was a prominent figure in the local community. However, compared to Philip's father, who was a doctor in London, the uncle's family lived a bit more frugally. Philip's uncle was not a bad person, but he was cold and rigid in personality. He set strict daily routines for his family, making life monotonous and lifeless. For him, taking in Philip was more out of an inescapable sense of duty, and he had little affection for the child. As a result, his expressions of care were also awkward. Compared to the uncle, Philip's aunt was a more sensitive and gentle person. She had always longed to have her own child, and Philip's arrival gave her a chance to be a mother. However, due to lack of experience, the aunt was always too reserved when communicating with Philip, appearing clumsy and at a loss. This made Philip feel awkward, and the aunt herself was hurt. After a period of adjustment, they finally developed a bit of understanding and formed a somewhat awkward yet polite relationship. Living in such a household, you can imagine how oppressive and boring it must have been for a 9-year-old child. Philip's congenital disability in his foot also made it unsuitable for running and jumping. He was not a cheerful child to begin with, and his personality became even more introverted at this time. The only interesting thing Philip could find in his uncle's house was books. His uncle had a hobby of collecting books and bought many, but he himself did not read much. From his uncle's bookshelf, Philip could often find some interesting storybooks and become so engrossed in reading that he would not respond when called for meals. Maugham wrote, unconsciously, Philip developed the most delightful habit in the world, reading. He did not realize that he had built a sanctuary in his heart, a place where he could escape from all the sorrows of life. In this way, books became the best companion in Philip's life as a lodger, helping him alleviate his loneliness. After entering high school, Philip found that compared to the children around him, he was more knowledgeable and mentally more mature. But his disability caused him trouble. Because of his lame foot, he became the odd one out in the eyes of his classmates, subject to ridicule and even physical abuse. One rude teacher even cursed him as a cripple in a fit of anger. At first, Philip did not understand why such unprovoked malice was directed at him, but later he became even quieter and more immersed in the world of books, seeking comfort in fantasy. A child who loves reading naturally does well in school, and Philip's academic performance earned him various scholarships. The coarse children found him odd and boring, and since he was also the principal's favorite, they gradually stopped paying attention to him. Philip finally found peace. In fact, deep down, Philip had been quietly observing the people around him. He envied his classmates who were physically strong and cheerful, envying them so much that he imagined himself exchanging bodies with them, walking with their legs, and talking with their likable faces. I specifically point out this peculiar psychological mechanism because it is actually a portrayal of Maugham's own inner world. Maugham's stutter and unremarkable appearance made him feel inferior from childhood, leading him to often fantasize about his soul leaving his body and entering someone else's, experiencing the world in another shell. One of Maugham's biographers investigated the list of his high school classmates and found a student named Ashendon, who was a healthy, active, and excellent child, praised by teachers and popular among classmates. Ashendon is the name Maugham chose for himself in the three works The Moon and Sixpence, Ashendon, and The Razor's Edge. Perhaps the young Maugham did not realize that his ability to project himself into others' minds was actually helping him practice the skill of a good writer to perceive human nature. Maugham's sharpness and perceptiveness originated from the inferiority complex brought on by his physical appearance, which perhaps also reflects his favorite biblical verse, "Beauty is born from ashes." Back to the story. During his teenage years, Philip, due to his sensitivity caused by his disability and the mental acuity developed through reading, formed a clear sense of self at an early age. In Maugham's view, this sense of self is rare and precious. He wrote, "Although everyone can equally be aware that their body is an independent and complete organism, not everyone can possess an independent and complete personality. More people cannot clearly perceive the existence of the self, living like bees in a hive, deriving meaning and happiness from a sense of belonging to the collective." Philip's fate, however, granted him a bitter clarity, which helped him break free from the shackles of youthful naivety and gain the ability to introspect and understand human nature. However, this ability also made him more vulnerable to hurt and more skeptical of the ideal life as perceived by others. This determined his path in the future. After graduating from high school, Philip decided to explore his own life. He had long grown tired of life at his uncle's house and found the idea of becoming a clergyman utterly boring. Thus, he resolutely gave up the opportunity to pursue theology at Oxford University and went to Germany. Over the next few months, Philip was exposed to a wide range of knowledge and made a few friends. When his uncle wrote to him asking him to return to England, he was not particularly resistant. Even someone as rigid as his uncle was considering options for Philip beyond the clergy. He had heard from friends that at the time, in the late 19th century, there was an emerging profession called accounting. Although the practitioners of this field were of mixed quality, the threshold for taking on apprentices was getting higher and higher, and in the future, accounting had the potential to become a respectable profession like law or medicine. After returning from Germany, Philip followed his uncle's advice and went to London to study accounting. However, compared to accounting, he was more interested in London itself. Having lived in the countryside for over a decade, Philip, now 20 years old, was eager to experience the hustle and bustle of a big city. Over the course of a year, Philip confirmed one thing: he was completely unsuited for the accounting profession. His mind was filled with imaginative ideas from books and discussions with friends, and he could not tolerate the tedious and fragmented nature of accounting work. He wanted to do something more creative and lead a more romantic life. He decided to go to Paris to study fine arts. This time, Philip's decision infuriated his uncle. He scolded Philip for being fickle, and Maugham left a meaningful comment here, saying that Philip's uncle, like all cowards, placed too much importance on seeing things through to the end. For Philip, the only thing that mattered was to spread his wings and seek a meaningful, or at least interesting, life. After all, he was still so young. He was not too worried about his uncle's opposition because in a few months, he would turn 21 and inherit a small fortune left by his biological parents. As long as he did not spend extravagantly, this money would be enough to support him for a few years. Philip's story in Paris is a crucial part of this book. Maugham meticulously depicted several characters around Philip in this section. Upon arriving in Paris, Philip enrolled in an institution that taught painting. At that time, Parisians learning to paint did not attend many classes. Instead, those who wanted to learn would gather together, hire a model, and practice by drawing, then exchange critiques and insights. The first classmate Philip met in the studio was named Pris. Although Philip had never formally studied painting, he had seen a lot and indeed had some natural talent. He immediately noticed that Pris's painting was completely off. The lines were twisted, the structure was chaotic, and the canvas was ruined by excessive erasing. When he learned that Pris had been studying for 2 years, he was even more astonished. What made matters worse was that Pris was a very proud person. She firmly believed that her paintings were masterpieces and looked down on everyone else's work, causing others to avoid her like the plague. She might have been the most diligent one in the entire studio, but her paintings were truly terrible to anyone with a discerning eye. She was a brave lone wanderer on the wrong path. The truly talented students in the studio were two others, named Clutton and Lawson. It didn't take long for them to become friends with Philip. Lawson had a high level of natural talent, and his painting techniques were very refined. The portraits he painted were so well executed that even the most critical reviewers could find no faults. Clutton, on the other hand, was remarkable for his vision. At that time, Paris was dominated by Impressionism, with Monet, Manet, Renoir, Pissarro, and Degas being the heroes in the eyes of the students. However, Clutton keenly realized that Impressionism had reached an impasse. He traveled extensively, searching for painters and works that could inspire him with new ideas. Once, after returning from Brittany, he excitedly told his friends about an obscure painter. This man had originally been a stockbroker, who had made a considerable fortune by middle age. But one day, he suddenly abandoned his family and began living the life of a painter, as if nothing in the world mattered more than painting. Clutton believed that this painter could blaze a new trail for Impressionism. His friends found it hard to comment on his statement, as they had never heard of this person before. Some even suggested that Clutton was just being pretentious. If you are familiar with the history of Western art or have read Maugham's other famous novel The Moon and Sixpence, you must have already guessed that the painter Clutton referred to is none other than the later groundbreaking Impressionist master, Gauguin, who is also the prototype for the protagonist Charles Strickland in The Moon and Sixpence. From this perspective, Clutton's judgment of art was indeed accurate and ahead of its time. However, the problem with Clutton was that he talked a lot but painted very little. Moreover, whenever his friends wanted to see his paintings, he would dodge and make excuses. It seemed as if he had become trapped in an abstract world of ideas, obsessively searching for the true essence of art in the void. Compared to him, Lawson was much more pragmatic. However, Lawson was also aware of his own limitations. His painting skills were impeccable, and given time, he would surely become a well-known painter, with wealthy merchants and even royalty seeking him out for portraits. He could live a comfortable life based on his talents, but the name Lawson would not be inscribed in the history of art. Once, after looking at Lawson's paintings, Clutton said that while they were technically flawless, they were also utterly devoid of meaning. Lawson felt helpless, but he knew deep down that Clutton's assessment was correct. What is Maugham really talking about by telling these stories of young painters? I believe he is addressing a recurring theme in his works, the gap between genius and mediocrity. As someone who made a living from creation, Maugham was extremely sensitive to this issue. I think that even when he humorously referred to himself as a second-rate writer, there was still a hint of bitterness beneath his apparent equanimity. Maugham had a wide social circle, and he had witnessed both unparalleled talents and many extremely hard-working but average individuals who exhausted their entire lives with little to show for it. Of course, he had also seen many astute people who dressed up their half-baked insights as extraordinary conversations, navigating through various aspects of life with a facade of respectability. Judging from his works, it is clear that Maugham admired genius. The protagonists he created often confronted secular life in extreme ways, throwing everything into the pursuit of their ideals and living like shooting stars. However, Maugham also harbored sympathy for ordinary, even mediocre, people, allowing them to find their own contentment within their respective stories. For Maugham, the ability to properly manage the relationship between talent and diligence, ideals and reality, is the fundamental issue in everyone's life. It determines their happiness and even their survival. Back to Paris in the story, how did Philip perform among those idealistic young people? Indeed, his talent was significantly higher than Pris's, but as he spent more time with Clutton and Lawson, he gradually realized that he lacked a certain ability that they possessed. Clutton and Lawson had an instinctive intuition. They could roughly judge the artistic value of a painting through their senses alone, without needing to resort to words. Philip, however, always had to listen to their explanations for a long time before he could understand through language what they had grasped intuitively. This made Philip feel uncertain. At this time, a very regrettable and terrible thing happened. Pris committed suicide. This poor person, who regarded art as her life, was mercilessly rejected by the god of art and finally, in despair, ended her life in poverty and loneliness. Philip, as the last person she had contact with before her death, took care of her funeral arrangements. He was filled with a sense of loss and couldn't help but think about himself. Could he become a true painter? Or would he spend half his life only to realize that he had taken the wrong path? Philip made a brave decision. He sought out a very strict painter who had previously instructed students in the studio and invited him to his residence. Philip showed his paintings to the senior painter one by one. The senior painter looked at them, nodded, and remained silent. Philip told the senior painter that his money would only support him for a few years, and he was not afraid of disappointment. He just wanted to hear the truth. The senior painter, seeing Philip's sincerity, also put aside his arrogance and sarcasm. He said to Philip, "You have a skillful hand. If you work hard, you could become a fairly good painter. There are hundreds of people who paint worse than you, and there are also hundreds who are on par with you. The paintings you showed me do not reveal any talent, but you have put in effort and you are quite clever. At best, you could become a second-rate painter. But considering your situation, you should give up." This was a heart-breaking answer for Philip, but this heartbreak was like a blessing. He thanked the senior painter. As the senior painter was about to leave the room, he suddenly turned back and patted Philip on the shoulder, saying, "Do you know, I would give anything in the world for a chance to be your age again, to meet someone who could give me such advice, and to follow it obediently." The senior painter was of an age similar to Philip's uncle, having lived through most of his life. His name was well known among students studying painting in Paris. They respected and feared him, and he could support his family through his paintings. But he understood that his artistic achievements had reached their limit. Looking at the senior painter in front of him, Philip saw a glimpse of what he might be like in 20 years. He made up his mind and left Paris. Philip's life after that was still full of rich experiences. After giving up painting, he went to London to study medicine. His academic progress was uneven, and it took him 7 years to finally obtain his medical license and a means to make a living. During these years, he experienced a painful love affair. He fell hopelessly in love with a vulgar and despicable person, suffered deception and betrayal, and went through a lot of hardships before finally breaking free. In the face of intense passion, human reason is utterly defeated. In Maugham's view, this is another heavy shackle of human nature. He wrote this story in the book in an extremely vivid way, which really exhausted me emotionally. Due to space limitations, I won't elaborate here. If you are interested, please read the original book. During the years of studying medicine, Philip was always thinking about the meaning of life. In Paris, he had made friends with an elderly poet. This poet lived in poverty, spending his days drinking in a small tavern. He often made some strange remarks while drunk, which drew sideways glances from the guests at neighboring tables, but also amazed Philip and other young people who loved to think. Before Philip left Paris, the poet gave him an old Persian carpet, mysteriously saying that this carpet was the meaning of life, but he could not reveal its mystery, and could only let Philip figure it out for himself. What meaning could a carpet possibly have? Philip didn't take it too seriously. However, years later, he suddenly came up with his own interpretation. During these years, while interning in the hospital, he witnessed too many deaths. Many people gave up treatment because of poverty, many abandoned their families for the sake of practical interests, and many who loved life and hoped for recovery still ended up with disappointing outcomes. Is there any meaning in the lives of these people who have lived their lives in the world in a mediocre and hurried manner? Philip thought that perhaps everyone's life is like a Persian carpet. The minutes, hours, days, and years we spend will leave marks on this carpet, creating a chaotic yet beautiful pattern. When a life comes to an end, it leaves behind a unique trajectory of life. This trajectory may not be related to eternity or truth, but it has existed in reality, just as everyone's life has undeniably existed. No one's life is lived in vain. My interpretation of Maugham of Human Bondage ends here. At the end of the novel, Philip has a happy ending. To take into account the reading experience of some friends who will read the original book, I will not elaborate on this ending in detail. If you are interested, please read the original book. At the beginning of this audiobook, I posed a question. Compared to Maugham's other representative works, the theme of human bondage is very unique. What makes it unique? Friends who are familiar with Maugham probably already have an idea. In works such as The Razor's Edge and The Moon and Sixpence, the protagonists created by Maugham are extraordinary people who transcend the secular world. In pursuit of a lofty spiritual ideal, they run towards the distance, leaving the world with only a vague receding figure. Even in a shorter and more ambiguous work like The Painted Veil, the protagonist still ignores the ugly aspects of life for a noble purpose. In contrast, Philip's story is a process of returning to reality from an ideal. He also had uncontrollable passion in his youth and pursued his ideals with all his might. But in the end, he accepted his own limitations calmly, like a bird soaring into the clouds that eventually descends and lands with its feet firmly on the ground. Some people might think that this attitude lacks a bit of heroism, but I believe that facing the shackles and continuing to move forward while carrying them is another kind of bravery. After all, using every down-to-earth moment to draw your own unique life trajectory is perhaps the true heroism in ordinary life.